listening to I Am Refocused Radio with your host, Shamaya Reed. This show is designed to inspire you to live your purpose and regain your focus. And now, here's your host, Shamaya Reed.
Hey, welcome to I Am Refocused Radio. We are here once again, and today we have a true honor talking to our special guest of today, and that is Darryl Stickel. He is the CEO of Trust Unlimited. You can learn all about this amazing platform on trustunlimited.com, and you can learn all about their different courses, their blog, and their different services that we will kind of dive into for today. But before we do that, want to welcome Darryl to the show and say, hey man, how you doing?
I'm doing great. It's great to be hanging out with you, Shamaya.
Man, appreciate you taking time, man. So you are just doing great things with your business. You know a lot about, relationship building, trust building, business environment, culture, leadership. So when it comes to your story, man, what inspires you to start this brand?
So I grew up in a small town in northern Canada, and it was pretty remote, pretty hostile environment. People had to pull together. And so there was this sense of community and this feeling like if you could help people, you should. And I had some, tumultuous experiences growing up. I learned what it was like to be vulnerable, to need help, to feel helpless and hopeless. And somehow that communicated itself to others. I started going to school in the University of Victoria. And people would just come up to me and sit down next to me and say, I'm really having a hard time. Complete strangers would just open up to me and start talking to me. And I thought, if this is going to keep happening, I should get paid for this. But, more deeply, I wanted to understand what it was that was making people so comfortable being open with me. And so I started down a path towards clinical psychology and then shifted. Life happens and I evolved. I did a master's degree in public administration and then was working in native land claims in British Columbia. And they would ask me these deep philosophical questions like, what is self-government? Or what will BC look like 50 years after claims are settled? The last question they asked me was, how do we convince a group of people that we've shafted for over 100 years they should trust us? And I thought, wow, that's a good question. And it got me thinking about long-term disputes that seem so resilient. And so I went to Duke and wrote my doctoral thesis on building trust in hostile environments. And I wanted to understand how we could make things better, how we could help people get along more effectively. And I left there and joined Mckinsey and Company, a big management consulting firm. And they discovered that I had really good client hands. I was good with people. And so they started sending me to the worst places possible. And so I got a chance to apply the stuff that I had learned and that I'd been working on. And then in 2001, I was involved in a car accident and I ended up with post-concussion syndrome. And I just couldn't work 80 to 100 hours a week anymore. And so I started a small company called Trust Unlimited. And I've spent the last 20 years of my life helping people better understand what trust is, how it works, and how to build it.
And when you have your coaching services, what is your ideal client and what are some of the prerequisites that they may need to have in place before they get assistance from you?
Wow, that's a good question. The topic of trust seems so broad. I've worked with families who are struggling to connect with their kids from that to the Canadian military, trying to figure out how to build trust with the locals in Afghanistan, to senior executives, just trying to help their organizations be more effective and more efficient. Mostly for me, it's someone who's willing to do some work to try to figure out how to build stronger relationships with other folks. And it seems to have really big impact for leaders, because the more senior we become, the less direct control we have over outcomes, the more we depend on other people for all of our goals and aspirations, our objectives. We don't turn a wrench. We don't talk to a customer. Everything we aspire to is achieved through somebody else's work. So I think for me, an ideal client is someone with an open mind and someone who wants to to strengthen the relationships in their life.
And the word trust is it's pretty straightforward and pretty simple to understand, but yet for some reason that keyword trust is not easy for all of us. So with your experience, why do you think that is the case?
Well, I think we have a pretty profound lack of awareness around what trust is and how it works. The first thing I tend to do is give people a shared definition, which is trust is the willingness to make yourself vulnerable when you can't completely predict how someone else is going to behave. So there's these elements of uncertainty and vulnerability embedded in it. And a lot of times, there's a study that showed that 95% of people believe they're more trustworthy than average. And aside from being statistically impossible, it also means that every time we run into a problem, we assume it's somebody else's issue to deal with. And so we don't work on it ourselves. We don't focus on it. We're not as intentional about it as we could be. So I believe that trust building is a skill that we can all improve. And so that's what I focus on, is trying to help people better understand who they trust and who trusts them and how much they trust. And then helping them take stepwise, practical, applied approaches to actually building stronger relationships.
This is Refocus Radio, talking to our guest today, Darryl Stickel. You can go to his website. He's the CEO of Trust Unlimited. You can go to trustunlimited.com. Speak to the audience. I mean, we all face it sometime in our life where, trust and relationships could be hard, whether it's personal or professional, and they sometimes can be strained or damaged. What are some of the strategies that you have come across that can help heal those situations?
Yeah, so when things have gone wrong, a lot of times we have either, I talk to my students about internal versus external locus of control. And, internal locus of control means I master my own destiny. I make things happen in the world. I'm a vehicle for change. External locus means that I'm buffeted by the winds of fate. Things happen to me. And I used to say to my students, I'd say, who here has an internal locus of control? And all the hands would go up. It's a stirring sight. And I'd say to them, this is great news, because that means if you don't do well in the class, it's not because of me. It's not because the tests were too hard or things were unfair. It's all you. And they'd all kind of pause and go, well, wait a minute. So we tend to have an internal locus of control when we're successful and an external locus of control when we fail. And so when things go wrong, there's this tendency to want to say, that's not really my fault. It was circumstances, it was outside my control. And I think the first step that I advocate, because we interpret the world through stories, the first step I advocate is trying to understand the other person's narrative, their story of what just happened. So being able to say, I'm sorry about what happened, and then talk about how they were harmed, because they were vulnerable to us in some way and they were disappointed. And so being able to try to walk through in their perspective around what damage was done and how they were impacted. And then being able to say, here's my story of why this happened. And now let's talk about how we can take steps to reduce the probability that it happens again. And so that not just an apology, but a show of awareness, and then an attempt to build a shared narrative moving forward. And realizing that, like I said, trust is a combination of uncertainty and vulnerability. And so it's uncertainty times vulnerability gives us a level of perceived risk. And early in relationships, we've got high levels of uncertainty, which means we can only tolerate a small range of vulnerability to still fit beneath the threshold of risk that we're comfortable with. As that relationship deepens, the level of uncertainty starts to drop. The range of vulnerability we can tolerate starts to grow. Well, if there's a violation, and if we've disappointed someone or caused them harm in some way, their uncertainty goes up again, which means that we have to realize we have to start with a really small level of vulnerability and rebuild that relationship by slowly taking steps to reduce their uncertainty again.
when someone is listening to this and they themselves have experienced, broken trust or betrayal, what are some of the things that they can do to put them in a position to be able to trust and be trusted?
Yeah, that's a tougher one. Because partly what we have control over is our own behavior. We can take steps to explain to the other party, this is what happened, but this is the bigger impact of that. But that requires some level of vulnerability for us. It requires us sharing how we were hurt, which may be hard to do in the moment. If there are places where we can still trust that other person, if we're stuck with them, they're part of our life and it's hard for us to exit that relationship, then we can start setting new boundaries and new requirements that reduce the uncertainty for us and hopefully compress the level of vulnerability we're experiencing. That's a great question, because right now, if we look at the world, our vulnerability hasn't really gone down, but the uncertainty is skyrocketed, and it's bouncing all over the place. We're seeing changes in norms and values. We're seeing changes in technology. We're seeing changes in rules and regulations. There's the pandemic. There's all of these things have caused profound shifts in uncertainty for us. And so there's a great deal of discomfort in the world. And we're having a hard time exposing ourselves to one another in the way that we used to, a hard time being as vulnerable with each other as we're used to. So right now, it's hard for us to figure out how to connect. We're seeing pretty profound spikes in mental health challenges and those kinds of things. And really, for me, one of the most powerful tools is creating a shared vocabulary. Because a lot of times when we talk about trust, there's this feeling of discomfort around, I can't say I don't trust you because that feels rude and it might spark a reaction from you. But if I can talk about the uncertainty I'm experiencing or the vulnerability that I'm experiencing, that's easier, it seems.
Once again, you're talking to our guest today, Darryl Stickel. You can go to his website, trustunlimited.com. When it comes to trust building as a skill set, how are people, what's a good starting point for someone who is interested in taking that accountability to start the process of building that skill set?
So I think that there are 10 levers we can pull to build trust. And we all have the ability to build trust. Some are just better than others. Those who aren't very good have a lever that they pull. And it's usually the ability lever, Shemaya. So that they'll talk about their credentials, their experience, their background, what role they have within an organization. All of that is trying to convince people that we have ability, that we're skilled. Those who are better at building trust have multiple levers that they can pull. And those who are really good have multiple levers and they know when to pull which one. So, for example, within uncertainty, there are 4 levers. Because uncertainty comes from us as individuals and it comes from the context that we're embedded in. And those 4 levers, there's 3 of them that apply to us as individuals. There's benevolence, integrity, and ability. And benevolence is the belief you've got my best interest at heart and that you'll act in my best interest. Integrity is, do I follow through on my promises? Do my actions line up with the values that I express? And ability is, do I have the competence to do what I say I'm going to do? And so what I try to do both in the book that I wrote and in the masterclass that I've produced is walk people through these levers and show them how to pull them. So, understanding how to pull the benevolence lever, it sounds easy, but people struggle with it. And, I'll talk with parents and I'll say, how many of you here have your kids' best interest at heart? And everyone raises their hand. But when I flip the question and say, how many of your kids would say that? I get about a third, and it's somewhat hesitant. So if it's not clear and obvious in a place where it's supposed to be clear and obvious, then how do we go about pulling it with our colleagues, with those we lead? And the answer is we need to start including them in the conversation and having a level of empathy. So understanding what success looks like for you, what good looks like for you, what's important to you, starts to give me hints about how I can both be benevolent and make it transparent that I'm doing that. So if I'm talking to people about trying to build trust, I'll talk to them about, trust is the willingness to be vulnerable. Well, maybe I go first and I make myself a little bit vulnerable. And then I see how you respond. Do you respond in a similar manner? Or do you shut me out and try to avoid the conversation? And if I see you respond in a similar manner, then trying to show a little bit of benevolence is a really good start. Finding an overlap of interest or things that we both are passionate about. I mean, you and I were talking before we started. Your aspiration is to help people move along the right path. And that's why you do this podcast. It's why you're passionate about it. Well, there's an overlap in our interests because for me, the aspiration is no less than making the world a better place and helping people get along so that we can actually resolve some of the challenges we're facing. And so there's an overlap there. And for us, there's a space where we can be benevolent to each other.
I hope
that answers the question. Yeah.
Yeah, it does. One thing I would say too is, it says it right then. It says trust unlimited. And I don't know why I thought about this right now, but sometimes things just pop in your head. But when I think of trust unlimited, I think of it's almost like every single day you have to choose it in order for it to actually work. Because if you start skipping days, then the lack of trust just starts to grow.
Well, we're facing challenging times, Shemaiah. I talked about the spikes in uncertainty we're experiencing. We need to be more intentional than ever about building strong relationships with each other.
And it's a skill set too.
Yeah. And so, really what I tried to do, because I was having these profound moments of impact. I had a couple of moments with dads who were trying to connect with their kids who felt really disengaged and alienated from their sons. And we talked through the model. I coached them a little bit. And within a couple of months, the turnaround was incredible. Like this is, my kids run to me now. They throw themselves on me. The relationship's closer than it's ever been. And I thought, this is fantastic. I'm having this great impact, but I'm dropping grains of sand in the ocean. I need to get this out in the world. I need to scale it. I need people to come alongside and pick up great big rocks and create huge waves. Because there's the ability for us to be more intentional, to build stronger relationships with each other, to resolve some of the challenges that we're facing. But we just need to understand how to do it. And that's why I wrote the book. It's why I created the masterclass. I want this to be around after I'm gone.
When it comes to different relationships that we have with, friends, family, professional colleagues, it's this common bond. Trust is something that we have to use in multiple places. Do you think that it should be used differently or should it be consistently used the same?
Well, the model is the same, but the levers we pull are different and we pull them in different ways. And so one of the examples I like to use is a student I had, I was teaching in Luxembourg, and I would sit down with my students and I'd say, okay, tell me your relationship you want to strengthen. And he said, I want to strengthen my relationship with my girlfriend. I said, okay, great. I said, so what matters most to your girlfriend? Because we were talking about benevolence. And he said, I think her family. I said, okay, so tonight when you go home, this is what you're going to say. You're going to say to her, I was in class today and the professor was talking about trust, and he said benevolence is really important. This belief that we've got people's best interest at heart. And he asked me to think about a relationship that really mattered to me. And I said, you. So that's step one. You're showing her that she's on your mind. The relationship matters. And so that's a little bit of benevolence right from the start. So and then you're going to say to her, he asked me what mattered most to you. And I said, your family. Is that right? Now you're asking her for her input. You're including her in the conversation. Said, and when she says yes, you're going to say, so I would assume that it matters to you that I get along well with your family because your relationship with them is so important to you. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start spending more time with your family. I'm going to start calling them more often, trying to have lunches with them, trying to connect more meaningfully with them because it matters to you. And the next day he came back and he said, wow, did that go well? Apparently I'm allowed to talk to you whenever I want. And so we see that play out in an intimate relationship like that. But we can also see it play out in, for leaders. I worked with a leader who, she's a fantastic leader, but she was fairly new to the role, had a new team, and her organization measured trust levels, and hers was, 13 out of 100. And so we started having conversations. I started coaching her a little bit. And then we went and talked with her team, together. And I said, this is what benevolence is. This is what integrity is. This is what ability is. Now, what could she do to show those things? And here's what the context is. Here's how she's constrained, what the rules and regulations are. How can she more fully explain that to you? Took 2 months. They redid the survey. She went from 13 to 80. And so the model works across these different relationships. It's just sometimes there's different levers we have to pull, and we have slightly different ways of pulling them depending on the intimacy.
Once again, been listening on Refocus Radio, talking to our guest today, Darryl Stickel. He is the CEO of the company Trust Unlimited. You can go to his website, trustunlimited.com. Again, you can check out his different courses, and you can check out his blog and services. Once again, what's a great call to action as we wind down for our listeners that they can follow up with you on?
So my hope is that everyone who's listening buys a copy of the book, Building Trust, Exceptional Leadership in an Uncertain World, not only buys it, but reads it and starts to apply it. Folks can reach out to me at Darryl@trustunlimited.com, or they can check me out on LinkedIn. Check out the masterclass. It's a concrete, practical, applied approach to helping you build these skills so you can apply them to your relationships. And if you can't afford to do those things, there's free materials on the blog site, on the website. There's articles there that people can read. I'm really trying to make the world a better place. And I want people to be able to take these concepts and apply them.
Once again, I want to say thanks to our guest, Darryl Stickel, will be on the show, CEO of Trust Unlimited. Go to the website, trustunlimited.com. Share that website, share this episode with someone that you believe can use this. And, listen to this again. I'm going to be listening myself. I think we all can learn something from this. So I want to say thanks again, Darryl, for your time.
Thanks, Shemai.